In a small hospital in a border town in New Mexico, Dr. Jason West sees a routine patient, a 12-year-old girl named Aaliyah, who complains of severe stomach pain. With her is her silent, stern father, who tries to avoid direct eye contact. During the examination, the girl is very nervous. She looks at the door. She trembles. The X-ray shows the impossible. The girl just whispers softly, "You are the only one who can help." But he hears everything. Don't show him that something is wrong. In a modest, time-worn establishment where every corridor and exam room whispered tales of hardship and hope, Dr. Jason West began his day as he had on so many before. The hospital was a hub of transient stories and quiet resilience, its faded walls bearing witness to countless anxious mornings and bittersweet recoveries. On this particular day, however, an unsettling energy simmered in the sterile air of the waiting room. Drive West, a seasoned physician with gentle eyes and steady hands, was finishing his routine morning notes on the computer when a young patient was wheeled in on a gurney. The patient, a 12-year-old girl named Aaliyah, complained of intense abdominal pain, a complaint that, by itself, would have been routine. Yet something in her appearance and demeanor immediately set him on alert. Aaliyah was unusually trembling. Her wide, fearful eyes compelled him to lean forward, his practiced gaze deciphering every nuance. She furtively glanced toward the door, as if expecting an unseen threat to burst through at any moment. Her hands shook so visibly that even the soft hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights seemed to underscore her vulnerability. At her side stood a man whose very presence was as oppressive as it was inexplicable. Aaliyah's father, tall, sullen, with a rigid posture and a gaze that avoided meeting anyone's eyes, seemed to be controlling every movement his daughter made. His silence was unnerving. He rarely spoke beyond curt, monosyllabic responses, and his every gesture hinted at a constant vigilance, as though he were guarding secrets too dangerous to reveal. Drive West noted how the man's subtle glances towards Aaliyah's fearful expressions suggested that he was not here solely as a concerned parent, but as a silent warden overseeing a forbidden prisoner. As Drive West began the routine of entering Aaliyah's information into the hospital system, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound broke through the steady keystrokes. A quiet, trembling whisper that seemed to come from the depths of the girl's fragile frame. Leaning ever so slightly toward the computer screen, Aaliyah's eyes flickered desperately toward the approaching doctor, and in a voice so soft it startled him, she whispered, "You're the only one who can help. But he hears everything. Don't let him see that something's wrong." The words, laden with urgency and fear, sent a shiver down Drive West's spine. For a moment, time appeared to slow around him. His heart pounded as he grappled with the implications of her secret plea. The computer's screen blurred in front of his eyes as he processed that this was no ordinary case of abdominal pain. There was a dire subtext in the little girl's voice, a desperate request to protect her, to shield her from someone lurking in the background. Drive West knew, even as he hesitated over the keyboard, that his instincts must now guide his every move. He glanced discreetly up from his screen and observed Aaliyah's father. The man's face, stoic and lined with unspoken severity, wore an expression that could be interpreted as either deep concern or calculated indifference. It was his meticulous avoidance of direct eye contact and his overly rigid demeanor that deepened Drive West's suspicions. In his many years of practice, he had encountered patients with genuine pain and those hiding burdens far darker than physical ailments. Aaliyah's trembling, her furtive glances toward the door, and that whispered plea, they all bore the unmistakable marks of someone caught in a dangerous situation. With a calm that belied the turmoil he felt inside, Drive West finished inputting Aaliyah's basic details and rose from his chair. "Aaliyah," he said in a gentle, measured tone as he approached her bedside, "I'm Drive West. I'm here to help you feel better." His voice was warm, intended to soothe the child's palpable terror. Yet his eyes, trained to notice every subtle detail, never left hers as they searched for any hint of further distress beyond her complaint of pain. Meanwhile, Aaliyah's father shifted his weight, his jaw tightening as if bracing for an intrusion into secrets he had long guarded. His eyes darted briefly toward his daughter before returning to fix an unreadable expression on his own face. The tension in the room was thick enough to slice through, and every heartbeat seemed to drum a warning that something was perilously amiss. Drive West's mind raced as he steered Aaliyah gently toward an examination room. He mentally retraced the girl's soft plea, her whispered words echoing in his ears, and resolved to probe further into her condition, both medical and otherwise. His compassionate yet analytical nature told him that beneath the surface of this routine complaint lay a sinister truth, one that demanded not only his medical expertise but also the intervention of authorities. The man in the dark, silent role by her side was no ordinary guardian. There was something decidedly off about the scene. As Aaliyah was carefully positioned on the examination bed, the lights dimmed slightly to ease her nervous mind. Drive West began his routine physical examination, all the while keeping a discreet eye on the father, whose stern silence and cold control only deepened the mystery. Aaliyah's eyes flickered now and then toward the door, as if expecting both escape and rescue. In that tender, quivering heart was the hope of freedom, even as it carried the weight of dangerous responsibility. In that moment, as Drive West prepared to order further imaging to uncover the cause of Aaliyah's acute pain, he felt the enormity of her unspoken message sinking in. The simple act of entering her data had morphed into a call for help that could no longer be ignored. With resolve hardening in his chest and a silent promise to protect this vulnerable child, Drive West vowed to uncover the truth behind her dire condition. Knowing that the path ahead would force him to confront a twisted intersection of medical peril and human betrayal. The tension in the examination room deepened as Dr. Jason West, with measured care, prepared Aaliyah for the X-ray. The anxious murmur of the hospital corridors seemed to fade as every second stretched into an eternity. Aaliyah lay on the padded table in a dimly lit room, her wide eyes flickering nervously toward the slightly ajar door, while her small body trembled. Her father, standing rigidly at her side, maintained a stern posture. His face was even more unreadable in the faint light, but his clenched jaw and the way his eyes darted about suggested that he was growing increasingly agitated. Drive West's calm professionalism masked the storm of concerns swirling in his mind. As he adjusted protective coverings and explained the next steps in a soft, reassuring tone, the harmless explanation of severe abdominal pain no longer seemed sufficient for a child who kept glancing around as if someone might burst in at any second. The quiet plea she had whispered earlier, "You're the only one who can help, but he hears everything. Don't let him see that something's wrong," kept echoing in his thoughts, making him even more determined to see the truth. The X-ray machine whirred to life and soon produced its stark, revealing images. When Drive West studied the radiographs on the monitor, his breath hitched. Instead of the expected signs of common ailments like appendicitis or intestinal obstruction, the image was an impossibility. Dozens of tightly packed, uniform capsules were clearly visible in Aaliyah's abdomen. Each tiny capsule was crammed within what seemed to be her gastrointestinal tract, arranged in a way that defied any natural process. The radiographic evidence left no room for medical misinterpretation. It was unmistakable. Aaliyah's body was being used as a living container for smuggling drugs, a horrifying and illicit reality that turned a routine examination into a grim investigation. The shock of the discovery rippled through the room like a jolt of electricity. Drive West's eyes narrowed as he processed the magnitude of the situation. He could almost feel the weight of every stolen breath and the sadness hidden behind Aaliyah's fearful eyes. More alarming was the realization that the small girl wasn't merely being used. It seemed she was an unwilling participant in a dangerous scheme. Her silent terror, combined with the evidence on the screen, confirmed his worst suspicions. Without hesitation, Drive West reached for the telephone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed the local authorities. In a measured yet urgent tone, he explained the situation to the dispatch operator, emphasizing the need for immediate intervention. "This is an emergency," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I have a 12-year-old female patient with clear signs of drug trafficking. She's being used as a human container. Please send officers right away to secure the situation." Even as he spoke, he stole a cautious glance at Aaliyah, seeking any sign of further distress or a change in her expression. As the call ended, the atmosphere in the room shifted abruptly. The father's presence, which had been imposing but largely silent until now, transformed into one of palpable aggression. The sound of his heavy footsteps approaching the doorway broke the tense hush as he came to stand directly behind his daughter's gurney. His eyes, now narrowed and burning with a dangerous intensity, betrayed his growing fury. His posture stiffened, and Drive West sensed that any indication of betrayal in the room was a direct challenge to his authority. "Doctor," the father barked in a low, clipped tone that vibrated with barely suppressed anger. "What exactly is going on here?" His voice, laced with a menacing edge, carried enough force to make even the steady Drive West's pulse quicken. The man's gaze flitted from the X-ray monitor to his trembling daughter before darting back, as if he were trying to shield himself from some hidden truth. He stood too close, a domineering presence that seemed to physically encase Aaliyah in a hostile bubble. Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears as she continued to shrink back, her whispered plea still echoing in the back of Drive West's mind. The father's aggressive tone and tight control over the situation suggested not only his complicity but also his desperation to avoid any detection. Drive West's internal alarms rang louder now. He knew that any protest on his part could incite the man to act unpredictably, and he also recognized the desperate vulnerability in Aaliyah's eyes. With clinical detachment, Drive West kept his tone even as he addressed the father. "Sir, I'm concerned for your daughter's health. The X-ray has revealed some unexpected findings that require immediate attention." His words were carefully measured so as not to provoke further hostility, while also ensuring that the truth of the situation was unequivocally clear. The father's jaw tightened further, his eyes flicking suspiciously between the doctor and the computer screen. It was at this critical moment, as the father's agitation escalated, that Aaliyah's small, scared voice broke out again, barely audible amid the tension. "Please, don't let him go," she whispered desperately. The statement, simple yet packed with a foreboding urgency, sent another shockwave through the room. Drive West's heart clenched. The plea, laden with fear and an instinctual desire for protection, underscored that Aaliyah was not just an unwitting victim. She understood that behind the cold, unyielding exterior of the man beside her lay a dangerous threat. As the police were en route, the father's demeanor darkened further. Every subtle shift in his expression now conveyed that he might do anything to keep control of the situation, even if it meant physically intervening. Drive West made a final mental note of the father's intense, almost predatory demeanor, a vital clue for what was to come. In that fraught interval, as the minutes dragged on in painful suspense, the initial shock of the radiograph gave way to the grim realization of a live smuggling operation unfolding right before his eyes. Drive West knew that the stakes had escalated far beyond the realm of ordinary medical emergencies. The clandestine nature of the operation, the child's silent, terrified defiance, and the increasingly aggressive behavior of the father all pointed to a dangerous underworld operating under the guise of paternal authority. With a steady resolve fueled by his deep compassion for his patient, he prepared himself to act not only as a healer but also as a protector, a role he never expected to be thrust upon him in the quiet corridors of a modest border town hospital in New Mexico. Later that afternoon, after the tumult in the examination room had momentarily subsided and the door closed behind the grumbling father, Dr. Jason West recognized that a private conversation was imperative. Seizing a moment when the corridor outside was momentarily empty, he gently requested that Aaliyah accompany him to a secluded consultation room down the hall, a small, softly lit space far from prying eyes and the stifling presence of the man who loomed dangerously close beside her earlier. Once inside, the door clicking shut behind them, the atmosphere shifted from oppressive vigilance to one of tender, careful refuge. Drive West knelt beside the small chair where Aaliyah timidly sat, her gaze lingering on the door as if the very act of speaking might set off alarms. Her large eyes, clouded with equal measures of terror and hope, darted cautiously between his kindly face and the shadowed corners of the quiet room. His gentle tone reassured her. "Aaliyah, you're safe here. I promise no one will hear us except me, and you can tell me anything you need." For several long moments, silence blanketed the room as Aaliyah's trembling hands fiddled with the frayed hem of her dress. Finally, with a barely audible quaver in her voice, she whispered, "Please, I need to tell you something. But you must promise me you won't let him catch on." Her eyes shimmered with tears as she continued in a low, almost broken tone. "I'm not really his daughter. I don't belong to him." Drive West's heart sank as he absorbed her words. In that gentle confession lay a truth far darker than any routine case. He eased his tone further, leaning in so that his voice was a warm murmur meant only for her ears. "Aaliyah, can you tell me what you mean? I want to help you." Her voice faltered for a moment. After a shaky inhale, she began. "It started when I was very little. He took me from someone else. He tells everyone that I'm his daughter, but I know I'm not. I was kidnapped. They used me." Her small frame shook as she recounted fragments of her ordeal, words barely more than broken syllables yet resonating with a desperate clarity. "They packed drugs inside me. They put capsules in my body, in places I can't stop the pain. Every day, I feel something crawling inside that isn't supposed to be there." She paused as if the terror of her thoughts nearly silenced her voice, then whispered, "And I'm so scared of him. I'm scared of what he will do if I try to run or if I tell someone. Please, Drive West, don't let him escape. Don't let him stop me from being free." Drive West's eyes filled with a mix of compassion and grim determination. Here was a 12-year-old girl, forced into an unimaginable role as a living container for drugs, with a man, no, not her real father, who was not only her captor but also a dangerous smuggler. The revelation struck him with the weight of 1,000 unsaid laments. "Aaliyah," he said gently, "you are incredibly brave. I promise you I'm here to help. You are not at fault for what happened to you." Her eyes, usually downcast in fear, flickered with a glimmer of fragile hope as she clutched a small, crumpled handkerchief. "I'm so scared," she murmured. "Every day, I dread the sound of his footsteps, his heavy breathing when he's near. I have to be quiet, I have to be still. I learned never to make a sound if I don't want him to notice that something is wrong." Her voice broke as she added, "I've learned to hide my feelings, so no one will think I can't handle it, but I can't do it alone anymore." Drive West took her hand, his own steadying hers, and offered a reassuring smile. "You did exactly the right thing by telling me. I will protect you, Aaliyah. We're going to get you out of this, and you'll finally have a chance to live a life without fear." He paused, choosing his words with care. "I need you to tell me everything you can remember about what happened, about who brought you here and why, but only if you feel ready. You have nothing to be afraid of with me." Her eyes widened briefly at the invitation to speak further, her small face etched with the gravity of her secret. After another long moment of silence, Aaliyah's voice, wavering but determined, continued, "I don't remember my real family. I only remember that I used to know laughter and softness before he came. I remember someone calling me by a name that wasn't Aaliyah, a name that felt like home." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Please, doctor, help me. I want to be free, and I don't want him to hurt more people. Make sure he's caught, so he can't take anyone else." Within that tiny, secluded room, the truth of Aaliyah's plight spilled out. A truth of kidnapping, exploitation, and a stolen childhood. Drive West absorbed every trembling word, his conscience alight with the urgency of her situation. The revelation that Aaliyah was no stranger to fear, and that the man she had been forced to call father was not her true parent, but rather a menacing smuggler cloaking his crime behind a facade of paternal authority, galvanized him into action. He resolved that medical ethics and his duty to protect this innocent life would demand swift and uncompromising measures. "We need to get you help, Aaliyah," Drive West murmured, his voice firm yet soothing. "I'm going to make a call, and I promise, I'll do everything I can to protect you. Trust me." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know this is very scary, but you are safe with me. I'll make sure that man doesn't get away, and that you get a chance at a new life away from all this." Tears glistened in the girl's eyes as she whispered, "Thank you, Doctor." Please, don't let him escape. In that moment, beneath the soft hum of a hospital air conditioner and the distant murmur of activity in the corridor, Drive West vowed silently that he would become her shield against the darkness. A guardian who saw not just the clinical data on a chart, but the beating, terrified heart of a child desperate for salvation. By early evening, the hospital corridors of Santa Rita had become a stage for a quiet but high-stakes drama. Dr. Jason West's troubling discovery had rapidly reversed a routine day into an unfolding investigation, a collision between medicine and a dangerous underworld. With his urgent call now relayed to local law enforcement, a small team of uniformed officers arrived at the hospital and discreetly began coordinating an operation to safeguard the young patient, Aaliyah, and apprehend the man who was, in reality, a cunning smuggler masquerading as her controlling guardian. In a low-lit corridor outside Aaliyah's consultation room, two police officers huddled with a stern-looking sergeant. Their voices were hushed but urgent as they scanned electronic tablets and reviewed the preliminary statements that Drive West had compiled. The chilling X-ray had confirmed that Aaliyah's body housed dozens of neatly packed capsules, evidence too incontrovertible to dismiss as a mere medical anomaly. Every measured detail, from the uniformity of each capsule to their unnerving arrangement, pointed to a deliberate operation where a child was used as a living container. The sergeant's gravelly voice broke the murmur. "We're mobilizing now. Secure the wings. This is a trafficking case in progress." His words carried the weight of a promise. No one would be allowed to let this criminal vanish into the night. Inside Aaliyah's examination room, the atmosphere remained fraught with tension. Drive West's soft apologies and gentle reassurances to the frightened child contrasted starkly with the heavy footsteps echoing in the hall. Meanwhile, Aaliyah's father had maintained a lurking presence, a silent, rigid figure who had so far wielded his displeasure in a controlled manner. But the news of the impending police operation seemed to shake that control. The moment the sound of approaching sirens and the hushed, determined voices of policemen filtered in through the hospital's thick walls, his demeanor shifted. His eyes sharpened into a cold glare, and his posture stiffened. It was clear. He suspected that things were about to spin far out of his control. Drive West, ever the protector, briefly excused himself from Aaliyah's bedside to confer with the officers. In a hushed exchange that crackled with urgency and risk, the sergeant outlined the next steps. "Doctor, we need to relocate the patient," he said, voice low and measured. "For her safety, and to preserve the integrity of the evidence, we're setting up a secure holding area in the hospital. Please keep her calm. Do not alert the father." A bead of sweat trickled down Drive West's temple as he nodded gravely. His mind raced. Every decision from this moment on could directly affect Aaliyah's future and safety. Within minutes, a small contingent of officers converged upon the room without fanfare, their presence methodical and unobtrusive. They began discreetly preparing to escort Aaliyah to the secure area designated for vulnerable witnesses. Unbeknownst to them, however, the man standing at the threshold, a man whose identity and actions had been shrouded in careful menace until now, was not unaware of their movements. His face, once a mask of controlled indifference, now contorted with growing suspicion and agitation. A furtive glance toward the door, followed by a rigid tightening of his jaw, confirmed what Drive West already suspected. The man was not just a passive bystander. He was deeply implicated in this illicit scheme and would stop at nothing to retain his grip on power. As the police officers gently guided an unresponsive Aaliyah along a hallway towards safety, the man abruptly stepped forward. His heavy boots thudded ominously on the linoleum floor as his eyes flared with anger. "What is going on here?" he barked, voice low and venomous, startling a nearby nurse and sending a ripple of unease among the waiting staff. His tone left no room for negotiation, a clear signal that he was acutely aware this operation might expose him. For a fleeting moment, the man's gaze darted around, as if calculating an escape route or an opportunity to assert dominance. The tension was palpable, a ticking clock that could erupt into violence if any misstep occurred. Drive West, returning to the doorway at that critical junction, met the man's furious stare with a steady, calm expression. "Sir, please," Drive West urged quietly. "For the sake of your daughter's well-being, allow the police to do their job." We need to protect Aaliyah. Even as the pleading words left his lips, he could see the incredulous shock and simmering menace in the man's eyes. The smuggler's confusion quickly transformed into veiled rage as he realized his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. "I will not let you take her away," the man snarled, his voice echoing with resentment and a threat that sent a chill down Drive West's spine. In the hallway, the uniformed officers exchanged tense glances, their bodies coiled and ready for action. One of them stepped forward to address the man with measured authority. "Sir, for your daughter's safety and compliance with the law, please step aside. We are here to secure her well-being." The man hesitated for an instant, his eyes flicking back to the gurney where Aaliyah's tear-streaked face had just been visible. In that brief pause, it was evident that while his instinct was to resist, he was also torn by a desperate desire to maintain the only semblance of control he had over her, however illegitimate that control might be. Inside the secure room, away from prying eyes, Aaliyah's soft, fearful whispers filled the space. "Please, don't let him go," she murmured, repeating the plea that had first reached Drive West's heart. Her fragile voice underscored the stakes of this operation. This child was not merely a medical case, but a captive in a twisted criminal network that had exploited her innocence. Drive West exchanged one last, weighted look with the sergeant before signaling that the internal transport of Aaliyah should continue immediately. The officers, acting swiftly and with the precision of a well-rehearsed unit, began to cordon off critical areas of the hospital. Cameras were checked, witnesses quietly observed, and additional security was discreetly arranged to protect the vulnerable patient. Meanwhile, the man, now more agitated than ever, found himself momentarily isolated in a long, echoing corridor. Shadows danced across his face as he realized that the net was tightening around him, and his internal calculation turned to plans of escape. Though his eyes burned with defiance, a cold bead of sweat betrayed his mounting fear. Every instinct told him that he might soon find himself in a confrontation not just with the authorities, but also with an irreversible loss of control over the life of the girl he claimed to be protecting. As the operation continued, a palpable sense of inevitability settled over the hospital. Drive West's steady resolve, and the coordinated, hushed efficiency of the police, stood in stark contrast to the erratic, panic-fueled movements of the man. In that crucible of tension, a fragile hope began to form. Hope that Aaliyah might finally be freed from this nightmare, that justice would prevail over exploitation, and that a journey toward healing could finally begin for a child who had suffered in so many silent, agonizing ways. In the midst of the orchestrated operation, the atmosphere in the hospital shifted from cautious control to an electric tension that prickled every nerve. As the police cordoned off key exits and hospital security staff hurriedly monitored the corridors, the man, the smuggler masquerading as Aaliyah's guardian, appeared to sense that his carefully maintained illusion of control was unraveling. With a sudden, violent jerk, he lunged from the secure area near Aaliyah's bedside. His eyes, wild with a mixture of fury and calculated panic, scanned the corridors for an escape route. The once silent hospital halls now rang with the echoes of heavy footsteps, shouted orders, and the urgent clattering of equipment as the first phase of the chase unfurled. "Stop him!" an officer barked, and in that instant the smuggler's formidable presence transformed into raw desperation. He tore down the hallway, his coat swirling about him like a dark, billowing shadow as he barreled toward the emergency exit. The nearby reception area erupted into chaos. Nurses and patients ducked for cover, while security personnel fanned out in rapid response. Drive West, who had just finished comforting a still frightened Aaliyah in the newly secured holding room, burst back into the corridor with concerned urgency. His face showed both disbelief and determination as he caught sight of the intruder creeping toward the back doors of the hospital. The chase was swift and merciless. The smuggler dashed through a side corridor marked by flickering lights and peeling paint, the worn linoleum floor reflecting his panicked, determined steps. Behind him, two uniformed officers gave chase, their voices distinct in their command as they coordinated with one another in measured, clipped tones. "Cut him off at the north stairwell," one officer ordered. The smuggler's chest heaved as he navigated sharp corners and turned corners, he must have memorized from his previous visits to this very building. Yet, in his haste, his every movement betrayed not the practiced agility of a hardened criminal but the erratic, stumbling motions of a man caught off guard by the sudden ferocity of pursuit. As he reached the emergency exit, a set of double-glass doors that led out onto a rain-slicked sidewalk, his eyes darted around in panic. The doors, however, were not fully open, and an officer promptly intercepted him before he could push them wide enough to escape into the dark New Mexico evening. Their confrontation was immediate and fraught. The smuggler's hands clenched into fists as he shouted, "I'm not going back there. Let me go." His voice, tinged with bitter defiance and raw desperation, ricocheted off the sterile walls of the hospital. The officer, his stance stiff and unwavering, replied, "You're not going anywhere until we get answers, and they're coming with you." In that crucible of confrontation, every second counted. The smuggler, realizing that physical resistance might buy him a momentary reprieve, launched himself at the officer, a violent scuffle erupting as two bodies tangled amid the scattered equipment near the exit. Drive West, watching from a short distance, felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He could see Aaliyah's tearful, anxious eyes in the secure room, silently pleading for safety, and his resolve hardened even further. This was not just a case of smuggling or lawbreaking. This was a child's life hanging in the balance. The altercation spilled into a wider corridor, where additional police officers converged. The struggle was brutal and chaotic, a mix of desperate strikes, shouted commands, and banged doors. Amid the melee, the smuggler managed to break free from one officer's grip, sprinting once again into a narrow side hallway. But his fleeting attempt at freedom was met with another blockade. A pair of officers intercepted him at the far end, corralling him like a cornered animal. His breaths came in ragged gasps as he fiercely resisted, yet it was clear that the controlled coordination of the law enforcement team was gradually overcoming his desperate efforts. In the thick of this turbulent chase, Drive West's mind raced with strategies that extended well beyond the immediate physical pursuit. Every detail, from the way the smuggler had moved to the threatening tone in his shouts, was recorded mentally, destined to offer critical evidence in exposing the criminal network he represented. More importantly, Drive West recalled Aaliyah's whispered plea, "Don't let him escape," and felt the weight of that promise. As the smuggler's resistance finally faltered, he was forcibly subdued and handcuffed. The raw intensity of his protests mingled with the resounding claps of police commands, until only a heavy hush remained over the now dangerous corridor. Back in the secure holding room, a hush had fallen again over Aaliyah's trembling form. Drive West returned to her side, offering a gentle, assuring smile that belied the storm he had just helped quell. "You're safe now, Aaliyah," he said quietly, his voice a warm counterpoint to the earlier chaos. The confrontation had been fierce, and the smuggler's futile attempt to escape had been thwarted by the unwavering determination of those committed to protecting her. In that moment, as the echoes of the chase faded into the background and the steady hum of hospital operations resumed, the fragile promise of rescue and reform began to take shape, a promise that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. In the aftermath of the violent confrontation and the arrest of the smuggler, the hospital was left with a fragile sense of order amid lingering chaos. Now, the focus shifted entirely to Aaliyah, this brave, tormented 12-year-old, whose future depended on delicate, immediate intervention. Dr. Jason West led the charge to stabilize her condition while a team of specialized pediatric medics prepared for the next, critical phase, the safe extraction of the illicit capsules hidden deep within her body. Inside a secured treatment room bathed in soft, clinical light, Aaliyah was gently transferred onto a specially prepared examination table. Vital signs were closely monitored by a cadre of nurses in protective gear who moved with methodical precision. Every movement was measured and calm, designed to soothe the girl's frayed nerves. Drive West stood by her side, his kind yet determined eyes never leaving her trembling form. He knew that beyond the physical pain, a pain that had manifested as a mysterious, severe abdominal ache, Aaliyah was fighting a quieter, even more profound battle, the fight for her innocence and her very survival. A renowned pediatric surgeon arrived moments later to oversee the extraction procedure. With expertise born of many years in high-stakes, sensitive operations, she explained to Drive West and the team that the capsules, arranged in a near-miraculous order on the radiograph, were likely packed tightly in her gastrointestinal canal to hide contraband. The arrangement had been so meticulous that it defied natural physiology, a grim sign that she was nothing more than an unwitting, exploited drug mule. Time was of the essence. The longer the capsules remained in her system, the greater the risk of toxic reactions, internal injury, or even a fatal overdose. After obtaining the necessary consents and establishing that Aaliyah was stable enough for a surgical intervention under monitored sedation, Drive West and the surgeon moved quickly. In a hushed, sterile operating suite off the main corridor, Aaliyah lay beneath a cascade of cool, white lights. A series of preoperative checks ensured that her heart rate, blood oxygen, and blood pressure were steady despite the stress that had clearly taken its toll. The surgeon began to gently insert a long, flexible endoscope, a tool that would allow her to visually inspect Aaliyah's inner passageways, while a team prepared to extract the drug capsules one by one. Throughout the procedure, Drive West communicated softly with Aaliyah, his calm words a lifeline in the midst of clinical preparations. "You're doing great, Aaliyah. We're here with you every step of the way," he murmured. His reassurances, though clinically measured, carried an emotional weight that made a difference. Amid the soft beeps of monitors and the low hum of surgical equipment, the surgeon carefully advanced the endoscope. On the monitor, the haunting image of the tightly packed capsules came into view, a grim testament to the cruelty of those who exploited her. The extraction was painstaking. With expert precision, the surgical team worked to release each capsule from its cramped confinement in Aaliyah's intestines. The process was long and required patience. The medical monitors displayed minute fluctuations in her vital signs, prompting calculated pauses and reinforcements of fluid and medication to stabilize her condition. Nurses dutifully documented every moment, knowing that the details of this procedure could serve both as crucial forensic evidence and as a benchmark for her recovery. Amid the concentration, every extracted capsule was carefully set aside in a sterile container. Their number confirmed the grim reality. Aaliyah's little body had been used as a living container for criminal cargo, a fate no child should endure. Over the course of several hours, the surgical team managed to extract the majority of the capsules. Finally, with the last of the contraband retrieved, the surgeon announced the conclusion of the procedure. A collective sigh of relief filled the room as soothing sounds of ventilators and soft instrumental music replaced the previous tension. Even though the extraction was not without its risks, and some minor internal irritation would require follow-up care, it was, for now, a critical victory. Once taken from the operating room, Aaliyah was transferred to the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, PICU, where she would spend the next critical hours under close observation. The neonatal-like precision of ICU monitoring allowed the team to ensure that her body was beginning to recover from the shock of the invasive procedure. Drive West sat by her bedside during the quieter moments following the operation, gently checking her hand and murmuring words of reassurance. "You were so strong," he said softly. "Now you're safe, and we're going to help you heal." While the physical recovery was underway, hospital administrators and social services swiftly coordinated with local authorities to gather more evidence against the smuggler and his network. Every piece of data, from the radiographs to the surgical reports, would contribute to building a case against the criminals exploiting vulnerable children. In parallel with the ongoing medical treatment, the hospital's child psychology team was summoned. A gentle, compassionate psychologist, well-versed in trauma and the nuanced fears of children, prepared to meet with Aaliyah. In a quiet room painted with calming shades of blue and decorated with soft, reassuring images, the psychologist sat with Aaliyah as she began the long, albeit necessary, process of speaking about what she had endured. With careful, slow words and art therapy techniques that encouraged her to draw the feelings behind the trauma, Aaliyah's tearful, hesitant voice slowly emerged. In a session marked by both sadness and the promise of healing, she began to acknowledge that while she might not remember every detail of her past life, her future could be different, one where her silence was not a barrier to recovery. In those early sessions, The psychologist explained that what she had experienced was not her fault, assuring her that the guilt and fear she had carried were misplaced burdens. Through the use of drawings, gentle conversation, and validated emotional support, Aaliyah started to share small pieces of her story. For example, she confided that she remembered running from shadows, hearing hushed threats, and clutching onto a hope that someday, someone kind would rescue her. A hope that had now become reality in the form of Drive West and the dedicated hospital staff. Drive West and the hospital's trauma team met later that night to review Aaliyah's progress. They documented every sign of improvement, every coherent word that she managed to speak when waking, and every subtle smile that hinted at a future where her past might heal. While the threat of exploitation still lingered in the background of legal proceedings and police investigations, inside the hospital walls, a new chapter had begun for this resilient young girl. The once silent, terrified patient was now in the hands of caring professionals who looked beyond her medical chart to see a living soul in desperate need of compassion and a chance at a normal life. As Aaliyah's physical state gradually stabilized and the psychological support sessions became a routine, hope began to infuse the sterile hospital corridors with a sense of new life. Her battered body would recover from the toxic presence of the contraband capsules, and her tender heart would slowly learn to trust again. Drive West remained a constant presence by her side, a mentor, protector, and friend who vowed that no matter the darkness that had once engulfed her, the promise of a fresh start was within reachable grasp. In the weeks and months that followed the harrowing operation, the sterile corridors of the small border town hospital slowly gave way to a quiet, hopeful evolution. Aaliyah now rested in a warm, softly lit recovery room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh linen, a stark contrast to the grim shadows of the past day. With the illicit capsules removed and her body beginning to mend, the young patient's most critical battle was shifting from physical healing to emotional rehabilitation. Dr. Jason West continued to visit Aaliyah every day after the surgery. His gentle presence, which had first come as both a healing hand and a steady beacon during the emergency, now served as an anchor amid the turbulent tides of recovery. Each morning, he would sit by her bedside and review the progress reports alongside the hospital's child psychology team. Together, they noted subtle changes. A slight brightening in her gaze as she awoke, the tentative smiles that appeared when a kind word was uttered, and sketches on paper that hinted at memories of a kinder past. Though scars, both seen and unseen, remained, the journey toward healing had begun in earnest. Aaliyah was soon transferred to a safe house arranged by the local social services, a comfortable, secure place designated specifically for children rescued from dangerous situations. In this new environment, surrounded by caring professionals and foster caregivers skilled in trauma recovery, she started to experience the kind of unconditional support that had long been denied her. The safe house, painted in soothing hues of blue and green, became a sanctuary where the painful memories of exploitation could gradually be replaced with trust, laughter, and the soft hum of everyday life. Within the walls of this shelter, a compassionate foster mother named Marisol took Aaliyah under her wing. Marisol, herself a survivor of personal hardship, understood the language of quiet resilience. She greeted every new day with warm hugs and gentle words, encouraging Aaliyah to express herself through art and play. In the afternoons, as the two sat at a small table cluttered with crayons, colored pencils, and scrap paper, Aaliyah began to draw pictures. Images of sunrises over vast deserts and a radiant smile that slowly emerged as she began to envision a life beyond fear. It wasn't long before she gave herself a new name, a name chosen in secret during one of her expressive art therapy sessions, a name that signified her rebirth and her right to a future of her own choosing. Though she was still called Aaliyah by those who rescued her, in her sketches and whispered conversations, she began to sign her drawings as Amara, meaning eternal, a tribute to the resilient spark that refused to be extinguished. During weekly sessions with a dedicated child psychologist, Aaliyah learned to articulate feelings that had been buried beneath layers of coercion and silence. With each carefully guided conversation, she offered small, hesitant insights into her past. The fearful nights, the damp tremors of terror at the sound of footsteps, and the oppressive presence of the man who had once claimed to be her father. Over time, These sessions transformed from moments of raw pain to opportunities for understanding and forgiveness. With the psychologist's help, Aaliyah came to see that her silence had not been an act of weakness, but a survival mechanism, a language of resilience that allowed her to endure when words would have betrayed her deepest vulnerabilities. Back at the hospital, Drive West met regularly with the local authorities during the legal proceedings that finally unveiled the truth about the man who had clung to Aaliyah like a wretched specter. Court records and investigative reports painted a damning picture. Her so-called father was indeed a seasoned contraband smuggler responsible for exploiting vulnerable children in a network that spanned far beyond the desolate borderlands of New Mexico. As the legal process unfolded, he was tried, convicted, and handed over to a secure correctional facility, where his reign of terror came to an unceremonious end. Though justice rarely erased the pain of the past, it marked a turning point, a moment when Aaliyah's life could be reclaimed and rebuilt without the shadows of abuse lurking behind every step. Months melted into seasons as Aaliyah's rehabilitation progressed. The safe house slowly transformed into her new home, a nurturing environment where each child was given the space to rediscover hope and a future filled with possibilities. There were days of laughter as she played simple games with other rescued children and evenings filled with stories of mythical heroes and brave heroines. In these narratives, Aaliyah found fragments of her own strength, tiny tales of enduring courage and the timeless belief that no darkness was too deep to be overcome by love. Even as her body healed and her emotional wounds became less raw, Aaliyah's connection with Drive West deepened into a supportive, gentle friendship. Much like a mentor or a trusted guide, he checked in on her progress, encouraged her artistic expression, and sometimes even joined her for quiet walks under the vast New Mexican sky. Those walks, filled with reflective silences and occasional bursts of shared humor, allowed her to see that there was still kindness and beauty in a world that had once been marked solely by brutality. Drive West's continued presence was a living testament to the promise that saving a life often means going beyond the call of duty, a commitment to see, to protect, and to empower those for whom society has failed. In time, Aaliyah began to embrace her new identity both as a survivor and as a blossoming individual with dreams. Through therapy and nurturing care, the memories of exploitation and terror gradually receded into the background, replaced by the bright colors of possibility. She became more confident, her new name Amara a quiet declaration of her eternal resilience. With every small step, whether it was speaking up in group therapy, proudly signing her drawings, or simply smiling at a kind word uttered by her foster family, she reclaimed a part of herself that had been stolen long ago. Standing at the threshold of recovery, Aaliyah, now fully stepping into the light of a new beginning, no longer saw herself solely as a victim, but as a young soul equipped with the strength to shape her destiny. And as the pages of her future began to fill with stories of hope, love, and rediscovered joy, those around her, foster family, therapists, law enforcement, and especially Drive West, celebrated the transformation of a once silenced child into a beacon of promise and renewal. She had remained silent not out of mere fear, but to survive. And thanks to one decisive act, she gained her chance at life. Subscribe if you believe that heroes are those who see more than what's written on a medical chart, and that every life restored is a victory for hope.